religion is not the way that we're going to get large groups of people to come together.
There's no historical evidence to suggest religion is sort of this uniquely tribalizing force.
Ross, that is totally irrelevant. Cognition was designed to solve problems.
It wasn't designed.
America was founded based on Christianity. America's the greatest country that's ever existed, and it's because of Judeo-Christian values.
Religion has a bad rap over the years.
Have a religious way of understanding the world. We're always moving towards some transcendent God, and I think people are looking for God now.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Things That Matter debate from the Free Press. I'm Sarah Isger, editor of SCOTUS blog and author of Last Branch Standing, a potentially surprising, occasionally witty journey inside today's Supreme Court. This July, the United States turns 250 years old. And as we mark that milestone, it's worth revisiting something the founders themselves believed about the experiment they were launching. In 1798, John Adams wrote bluntly to the Massachusetts militia, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." He wasn't alone in that conviction. A generation later, Alexis de Tocqueville observed that faith was the invisible scaffolding holding American self-government together. For most of our history, that observation held. Churches were where Americans learned to organize, to trust strangers, to care for neighbors, and to hold themselves accountable to something beyond their own appetites. But there is another side to that story. Religion in America has also been invoked to defend slavery, to resist civil rights, to justify the subjugation of women, and to exclude those who didn't fit its teachings. For millions of Americans, walking away from organized religion hasn't been a loss. It's been a liberation. The rise of secular ethics, of science, of democratic institutions that protect individual rights regardless of creed, these represent, to many of us, not a decline, but a long overdue maturing of a society that no longer needs supernatural authority to tell it right from wrong. Today, nearly a third of Americans claim no religious affiliation, a figure unheard of a generation ago. And yet, as faith recedes, Americans haven't stopped searching for the things it once provided: community, moral clarity, a sense that their lives matter. So, as we celebrate 250 years of this republic, Adams' words pose a sharp question. If the Constitution was made for moral and religious people, what happens when a growing share of that people is no longer religious? Where does morality come from, and is it enough? We are joined tonight by two formidable minds. Ross Douthat is a columnist for the New York Times and the author of Bad Religion, an argument that America suffers not from too much faith, but from the decay of its healthiest forms. And Steven Pinker is a cognitive psychologist at Harvard and the author of Enlightenment Now, a sweeping case for reason and secular progress. Please join me in welcoming Steven Pinker and Ross Douthat to the stage. Gentlemen, let's dive in. I want to start with a broad question. Are we better off without God? Mr. Douthat, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it's a privilege to be here on the side of Almighty God, either working several years off purgatory or adding a few years, depending on the outcome of the evening's festivities. So, are we better off without God? Absolutely not. And I will offer three reasons out of, a near infinity of possibilities. First, you can see the last 20 or 25 years in American life as a really useful experiment. It's unusual to have a group of leading intellectuals, scholars, journalists, and scientists come together and make a very concrete and specific set of predictions about what will happen if their ideas are put into operation. And I'm speaking here about the group that we know as the New Atheists, a group to which I guess Dr. Pinker was maybe tangentially associated. These were a group of formidable intellects who argued in my own journalistic youth that if America became less religious, if we set aside the superstition around Scripture and a belief in a cosmic sky daddy, enlightenment would indeed descend. Enlightenment now, right? Americans would become more respectful of science and scientific truths. They would become more reasonable in the way they dispute with one another, less polarized, less motivated by deep and profound enmities rooted in tribal dogmas and so on. And in fact, the United States did become less religious. And if you look around the United States as a whole, you will see that nothing that they predicted came to pass. And in fact, the reverse has been true. Society, under less religious conditions, is more polarized, more superstitious in all kinds of different ways, more tribal, more filled with profound, sort of almost cosmic hatreds for one another. Now, why might this be the case? The practical reason here is that it is good for human beings to have some kind of cosmic horizon on their understanding of their own lives, their understanding of society, their understanding of the truths that underpin the society in which they live. It's good for people to believe that their moral perspective on the world isn't just sort of an arbitrary creation of a particular culture in one specific time and place, but rather that the moral law is in fact connected to the fundamental laws of the universe itself, just as the great world religions have always preached. It's good for people to believe that the idea that you should love your neighbor as yourself isn't just a kind of utilitarian construct that maybe happens to work well because of theories of exchange and, if you read Adam Smith, it'll all work out in the end. No, it's good to believe that you should love your neighbor as yourself because your neighbor is made in the image of the creator of the cosmos. And it's good for human beings to believe that human life itself has a special and particular value, particularly in a moment when digital technology and artificial intelligence threaten to make many human lives feel almost obsolete. In all of these ways, religion speaks directly to the most profound dilemmas of the 21st century, but then there's also a more ultimate argument, which is that it's not good for the United States or any other culture to turn away from God because God pretty self-evidently exists. It's good for human beings and human cultures to be rooted in fundamental realities about the universe. Here I agree profoundly with Dr. Pinker's view that science and reason are incredibly important ways of illuminating reality. But I think when that light is shed properly and the things that it reveals are interpreted properly, it becomes clear that we still, now and hopefully forever, live in the kind of universe that religion and religious people believe that we live in. A universe created and ordered for our existence, designed with us in mind. We have value because the mind that created the universe intended us to be here from the beginning. Thank you.
Dr. Pinker, I'll reverse the question for you. Is Mr. Douthat right? Are we better off with God?
I can think of many things that would make us better off. We'd be better off with a greater sense of common purpose, with more trust and less polarization. We'd be better off with more knowledge of how to solve big problems like scarcity, disease, violence, and energy. And we'd be better off with moral clarity, with defensible convictions about right and wrong and where to invest our moral energy. God gives us none of these. God can't grant us a common purpose because the lack of evidence for gods and their doctrines and messiahs makes the concept inherently divisive. Now, no one gets upset about the belief that rocks fall down instead of up because any sane person can see it with their own eyes. Not so for the belief that babies are born with original sin, or that God exists in three persons, or that Ali was divinely ordained to be Muhammad's successor. And over the course of history, disagreements over these sacred beliefs have led to wars and genocides that have killed 50 million people. And of course, religious differences continue to incite violence in many parts of the world today. Second, God can't solve our problems. That's because the world works by cause and effect, not miracles and magic. There's a joke about a mountain climber who slips over a precipice and clings to a rope over a 1,000-foot drop. In his moment of fear and despair, he looks toward the heavens and asks, "Is there anyone up there who can help me?" A voice from above booms, "You will be saved if you show your faith by letting go of the rope." The man looks down, then up, and shouts, "Is there anyone else up there who can help me?" Third, God is not the source of morality. The God of Scripture slaughtered innocents by the millions, commanded his people to commit mass rape and murder, and prescribed the death penalty for blasphemy, idolatry, homosexuality, premarital sex, talking back to parents, and working on the Sabbath, while finding nothing particularly wrong with slavery, rape, torture, and genocide. Now, Ross is trying to persuade everyone, it's in the subtitle of his book, to believe in this God. He argues that miracles really happen, like when God jerked the sun up and down in front of tens of thousands of believers in a Portuguese village a century ago. Strange that now that everyone has a cell phone camera, these miracles no longer happen. So what would make us better off? It would be grounds for belief and action that we share by virtue of our common humanity. We all seek life, health, and happiness, and if we claim them for ourselves, we cannot deny them to others. We have a capacity for reason, which can be amplified by education, science, and free inquiry. This gives us a common mission: to apply science and knowledge to reduce suffering and enhance flourishing. We know this can make us better off because it has made us better off. We have doubled our lifespans, decimated poverty, and slashed the toll from crime, war, and accidents. No thanks to God, nor to an indifferent universe, but rather to human reason applied to human flourishing. Thank you.
Everyone in this room is better off than King George III was 250 years ago. Electricity, antibiotics, refrigerator, ubiquitous cell phones, and yet only 44% of Americans say they are very satisfied with the way things are going in their personal lives, the lowest in Gallup's history going back to 2001. But Americans who go to church every week buck that trend. They're significantly more satisfied with their lives than those who don't or who only sporadically attend. What do you suspect is the reason for that correlation, Dr. Pinker?
Yes, there is a correlation between religious observance and happiness and other positive traits. It's not based on God's existence or his morality, but kind of based on social science that religious observance is correlated with some positive outcomes. So a few things about it. First of all, it is a correlation. It does not show causation. It may just show that happy people like to do stuff. They go to church, they get out, they give blood, and unhappy people tend to withdraw and disengage. Now, there's some very weak and squishy evidence for causation, but it doesn't come from belief in God. It comes from the socializing, the multi-generational contact, the morally engaged community, the social trust. And we know this because if you look at the atheist spouses of religiously observant people who've been schlepped to services and to the church affairs, they're just as happy, they have just as many positive outcomes. So a way to sum up that research is it's not the faith, it's the fellowship. So I agree that we need more community and social engagement, and in the past, those tended to be bundled with religion, but that's not going to work going forward. The train has left the station. People, especially generations after the baby boom, are staying away from church in droves. If you ask people why they have fallen away from organized religion, they cite the harms that religion has caused, including massive sexual abuse by clergy. They cite the bigotry, particularly the prejudice against gay people, but they also cite science, a lack of evidence, and, quote, religion doesn't make sense. So I think we do need morally engaged civil society institutions that are less bundled with theological commitments with God. They can be secular service organizations like Rotary and Lions, which have done tremendous good at eliminating diseases in the developing world. It could be new humanist, rationalist, and effective altruist groups. It might be liberalized legacy religions that leave their theological commitments vague and symbolic and allegorical. One other point that's relevant to this correlation is that it does not hold between societies or states. That is, if you look at the correlation between happiness and other social outcomes like crime, drug abuse, obesity, abortion, the more religious the society, the worse the problems are. And if you don't believe it, consider some of the world's most irreligious societies, like Norway, Netherlands, and New Zealand. They're pretty nice places to live. Now consider some of the world's most religious countries, like Afghanistan and Congo. Those are places that people want to get out of. This is also true in a comparison across American states. The more religious, the more dysfunctional.
Mr. Douthat, same question, and also just to follow up, to add a question of what Dr. Pinker was saying, we've seen a drop in religious attendance, but we haven't seen that then rise in a resurgence to go to Lions clubs and Rotary clubs, et cetera. And so, again, what is the correlation there?
Right. I mean, we haven't seen some concomitant rise in people showing up at the local secular humanist association, because part of the story of the decline of religion is just a story of general institutional decline, declining social trust, declining participation, which shows up in all kinds of areas of American life. And it's why it's a mistake to think of the typical sort of post-religious American right now as a brilliant Harvard intellectual with remarkable hair, right, who has become rationally convinced that the creator of the cosmos is an illusion. In fact, the typical unchurched American is increasingly a sort of blue-collar, downscale white male, maybe, who's disconnected from all kinds of institutions, familial, social, not just religious. Now, that goes in certain ways to Dr. Pinker's point, right? It's not that there's some sort of some kind of magical religious wand where you attend church and you automatically become a better and happier person. Obviously, the benefits of religion are mediated through community as well as the operation of the Holy Spirit. What we should wish as Americans is to be neither Afghanistan nor Scandinavia, but to be the United States of America, which as a culture has always done an incredible job of balancing some of the absolute definite benefits of modernity, including religious toleration, a respect for pluralism, a refusal to simply sort of impose the totality of one religion's theological doctrines on society, with an abundant faith in a cosmic purpose for the human race. And obviously there are downsides to religious intensity. Those downsides are often manifested in zealous intolerance. There are also serious downsides to religious indifference, which are often manifested in anomie, drift, and despair. And it is simply the case that if you look across the developed world today, there is a strong correlation between secularization and a kind of loss of faith in human purpose and the human future, manifested most starkly in the declining birth rates that make it extremely unlikely that Dr. Pinker's predictions about the inevitable triumph of secularism and humanism over religion will come to pass, because the secularists and humanists don't seem to be making the basic choices that would enable the continuation of the human race. When people believe that human beings exist as things unto themselves, not just bundles of synapses and nerves stuffed together in a meat package destined for some kind of evolutionary optimization. When people believe that the awesome power of the human mind, again, eloquently unpacked across multiple books by Dr. Pinker, is in fact so powerful because it stands in a real relationship with the design of the cosmos. Not just sort of it's not just sort of a pleasant accident, comrade, that this jumped up ape from, millennia ago was able to penetrate all the profound mysteries of the universe. No, it reflects the reality that our minds exist in a real relationship with the structuring and ordering principles of the universe. Those are both true beliefs, but also powerful beliefs for the sustaining of human civilization.
Let's take some questions from the audience. Anthony Gross has a question. If you would stand up, Anthony.
Yes, so my name is Anthony, and I was raised Catholic, and my family's been Catholic for generations. And sometimes when I debate with friends, or I just think to myself, something I struggle with, if I was born in a different country or different region, I probably would be a different faith. And so if faith is often an accident of birth, how can someone step outside of what they're raised in and evaluate it honestly?
I don't think that this specifically applies to religion alone, though. Almost all of the beliefs that people hold dear and that people base their lives and convictions upon, and those include fundamental political beliefs, belief in democracy and human rights. They include sort of interpersonal beliefs, beliefs about the nature of sex or romantic love that might guide your dating life. All of these beliefs are inherited, right? And part of being a rational and serious human being is recognizing that and being able to at least try to partially step outside and say, yeah, you absolutely should not just be a Catholic because your parents were a Catholic, any more than anyone should just be a liberal Democrat or a believer in the principles of the Constitution just because your parents held those beliefs. You need to be able to rationally articulate the things that you believe and try and make some kind of assessment of whether it makes sense to stick by those beliefs. In the end, there are fundamental questions that the religions disagree upon, like, was Jesus Christ raised from the dead? But on broad questions about God, the nature of the cosmos, the nature of morality, there are profound overlaps between the major world religions that do suggest that they are all sort of groping towards or analyzing or reaching towards a similar reality. And that should give you some confidence that when you come to the end of your analysis and you decide, I'm going to stay a Catholic, or I'm going to become a Jew, I'm going to become a Muslim, something else, God is not out to trick you, right? God is not like, truth about the universe, it's buried in an obscure shrine in northern Japan and you'll never get there. Sucks to be you. That's not the God that I believe in. I believe in a God who is present in multiple world religions, is most present in my own Catholic and Christian faith. But if you don't end up there, you should not feel that you've lost, that it's like an all or nothing bet.
Whereas many religious dogmas really do depend on your particular upbringing. That is certainly not true of the truths of mathematics. It's not true of the truths of science. These are things that anyone can reproduce the train of reasoning that leads to them and can arrive at from any starting point, and they do.
How fortuitous it is that we find ourselves in a universe where that happens to be the case for our evolved, accidentally produced cognition. Aren't we lucky?
No. Our cognition was designed to solve problems, and if you look at people who...
Wasn't designed.
It was
evolved.
I'm using designed in quotation marks, the way evolutionary biologists do, namely that it is the product of a history of selection based on its function in enhancing survival and reproduction. So if you look at people who live in the lifestyle comparable to the one in which we evolved, they use their cognition for many practical purposes, for devising ingenious snares and traps, for extracting poisons and medicines from plants and parts of animals, for tracking animals based on fragmentary evidence from the spoor they leave behind. When it comes to the actual truths of DNA, the Big Bang, tectonic plates, people don't have an innate faculty for divining those truths. They get it through the scientific method, empirical verification, trial and error, and most people, most of the time, can't divine those truths precisely because we weren't selected to appreciate hidden laws of nature at that level.
In the words of social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, faith traditions accomplish the miraculous task of turning large numbers of people who are not kin into groups that are able to work together, trust each other, and help each other. And that sounds a lot like what we expect from government right now. And a person's political ideology, their politics, is that replacing religion, and is that a good thing in our society?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, there's no small irony in citing religion as a unifying force, as a way of getting people to work together.
Fair point.
Religion is not the way that we're going to get large groups of people to come together. But let me separate the two parts of your question, because there's a question about government and there's a question about politics. So yes, government is replacing some of the traditional functions of religion, such as criminal justice, such as social welfare. And is that a good thing? Absolutely, it's a good thing, because there's simply no comparison between the scale of what a government can do and what the scale of any private charities, including religious charities, can do. As a result of government social spending, there's been a massive decline in American poverty since 1960. Ronald Reagan once said some time ago the government declared a war on poverty and poverty won. He was dead wrong. Poverty lost. Poverty is down between 75 and 90%, depending on how it's measured. And some of that is due to economic growth, but some of it is due to government transfers like Social Security, Earned Income Tax Credit, Child Tax Credit, Medicare, Medicaid, and so on. Religious charities are just of a completely different order of magnitude. I think what you were alluding to is the idea that you sometimes hear that there's been a substitution of moral energy devoted to religion, now rediverted to politics. And so,
for as much as you study the evolutionary mind of man, it feels like we demand a certain amount of tribalism, and that we've replaced the tribalism of religion with the tribalism of politics, at least here in 2026, heading into a midterm election.
And that is not true. Because if that was true, then the least religious people would be the most politicized and the most polarized. But in fact, the most politically committed faction in the United States are evangelical Christians, and they are most polarized in the sense of having the worst views of the other side. Now,
I'm not sure that evangelicals' views of non-evangelicals are worse than secular liberals' views of evangelicals. I would doubt that.
Well, so you do have a point in that the two groups who have the most stereotyped views of the opposite side are evangelical Christians and committed atheists. However, the nuns, and by that I don't mean the ladies in the habits, but
right. You mean the bad nuns, not the good ones. Yes.
Yes. Well, the people who say, when they're asked what their religion is, they say nothing in particular. They are the least politically polarized. That is, they are the most centrist, and they have the most charitable view of the other party. So it is not the case that the more religion, the less politics, and vice versa. If anything, they seem to be correlated.
I don't think it's more religion, the less politics, but I do think that there is, to your point, a kind of quantum of tribalism in human affairs that is sometimes manifest in religion, but there's no historical evidence to suggest that religion is sort of this uniquely tribalizing force. There are particular periods, like the wars around the Reformation, when religion plays a particular role in fomenting violence. But if you go back to, essentially the entire history of the world and most of human history, most terrible wars have been fought over much more basic differences, over land and power and sort of secular material concerns, resources and so on. And if you go forward to the 20th century, it is obviously the case that the most ruinous wars were occasioned by fascism and Soviet communism, which were, again, sort of quasi-religious substitutes for sort of religious views about the cosmos.
All right, I want to get our next question from Chloe Valdery.
Hello. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian family, and my parents disowned me for being bisexual. Today, I am not allowed to go to my childhood home. So, Ross, my question is for you. How do you wrestle with the fact that many people in this country, in the name of Christianity, are mean and unkind to people because of their sexuality? Thank you.
I think that the shortest answer is a version of what I said in passing earlier, which is that religious beliefs carry with them distinctive vices that are, again, different from some of the distinctive vices of certain forms of secularism and atheism. And those vices are connected to misplaced zeal and intolerance. And I'm very sorry that in your own life you have been a victim of those forces. there are certain people who have experiences of religion that are fundamentally toxic. And there's no question of that. And there are entire religious cultures that can become fundamentally toxic. And people in those kind of positions are themselves in a kind of uncertain relationship to God and the order of the cosmos. And if God exists, again, I'm here to tell you that he does, but if God exists, I think the hope and the confidence is that there is out there in the world an experience of his love that is distinct from and capable of overcoming the experiences that you've had growing up.
Dr. Pinker, this next question from Mark Carlson is going to be for you. Mark?
Steve, people like you thought that secularism would lead to a rational paradise. Instead, Christian impulses seem to have crept into supposedly secular leftist politics. Love your enemy became suicidal empathy, and let he who is without sin cast the first stone became cultural relativism. Doesn't the history of 20th century Marxism show us where rational materialism leads? And shouldn't you, as a student of history, have seen where this worship of rationality would lead?
Well, you're assuming that Marxism was rational?
It was the worship of rationality, putting human presuppositions about right and wrong before the teachings of God.
If we judge an ideology by its effects, there are reasons to think that the precepts of Marxism were the opposite of rational. Namely, they led to disasters, but people held them anyway, so it was the opposite of the ideal of falsifiability. And they were they led to both economic and humanitarian disasters. So on rational grounds, we can say that Marxism was mistaken. So this is not, the failure of Marxism does not cast doubt on the value of rationality. It is precisely because we can evaluate it on rational grounds that we can identify what was wrong with it. Likewise, the horrors of the 20th century due to Nazism were not because Nazism was rational, quite the opposite. It had a number of obviously mistaken and monstrous beliefs, and it is by the lights of rationality combined with concern with human well-being that we can judge it as having been a disaster. I don't think that our problem now is that we have too much empathy. I think that the allegation that we're suffering from toxic empathy is mistaken. That too much empathy is the least of our problems. If I were to single out some of the things in Christian tradition that I think are worth keeping, then empathy, compassion, forgiveness, forswearing, revenge, all of those are good things because they can also be defended on rational grounds.
Let me follow up on Mark's question here then, which is, set aside the rationality of Marxism. When we look at communism, Marxism, Nazism, the greatest killers of the 20th century, the one thing they all have in common is they were not only secular in that they were not a fight about religion, they were emphatically secular. Religion was, in fact...
That's not true of Nazism. There was the Nazism had a lot of support from German churches. Hitler was not an atheist. Many Nazis were religious. The Vatican did not come out against Nazism. So it's certainly true.
These are separate questions, though. Nazism was not a secular ideology, that much is true. And Christian churches, in various situations, made a lot of very unwise and morally disastrous deals with Nazism. That said, the animating theology of Nazism was pagan and I would say satanic. And Hitler's ultimate goal, which you can read about in his Table Talk and other places, involved, finishing off the Jews, enslaving the Slavs, and then getting around to hanging the Pope in his own vestments in St. Peter's. So Nazism is in a slightly different category from Soviet communism, which is more of a kind of self-conscious attempt to build a society without God.
The point is that what seems to be replacing religion turns out to be polarizing. It's not just your view of humanism, which I think would be an ideal that most people, even religious people, would agree on, that we could set aside, you can maintain your religion or not, and then what replaces it is humanism. But that's not what we've seen in history.
since the end of the Second World War, with the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Written by a Catholic.
Well,
Sorry.
that's
Among
that's
other people,
Ross, that is totally irrelevant.
Among
it had
other
to be
people.
something. The fact that he happened to be Catholic, John Humphrey is the one you're talking about, and he absolutely disavowed any kind of religious or ideological justification of the Universal Declaration. The fact that he was Catholic is completely irrelevant. He had to be something. Now, we've seen since then an uneven rise in democracy, drooping somewhat in the last 10 or 15 years. But the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was the basis for dozens of national constitutions. But if you're looking at the overall trend since 1945, it certainly has been a rise of democracy and universal secular values.
The fact that religion is declining, despite the history that we've talked about, doesn't that mean that it's failing to provide people the thing that we're talking about? Community, the charity, the hedge against catastrophe that Dr. Pinker has suggested. It's failing in some way if people aren't finding that.
I mean, religion has failed institutionally in all kinds of ways in this era. Sometimes by being too intolerant and punitive and cruel, sometimes by being sort of lax and surrendering totally to the spirit of the age so that no one has a reason to go to church, sometimes by having scandals, sometimes by getting enmeshed with politics. Institutional religion is always failing, and then it's always recovering, right? And one of the useful things about being a Christian, though this also applies to our elder brothers in faith, the Jews, is that this is clearly promised in our sacred scriptures from the beginning. If you read the Old Testament, it's not a story of, the Hebrew faith going from strength to strength and just kicking ass all the time. It's like, things are pretty good. Oh, nope, everybody lost their faith and started sacrificing to idols. We're sorry. It's time for a Persian invasion. And this goes on over and over again. Then you get to the New Testament, and it's like, well, here's the Son of God, and how are his chosen disciples doing? Oh, they're all betraying him, and one of them really betrayed him, and the rest are fleeing, and so on. Like, if you read the genealogy of Jesus, which is a famously boring part of Scripture that people read at Christmas, and you go through the various characters listed as ancestors of the Savior of the world, they're not a row of like cosmic heroes. They're a row of sinners and screw-ups. And that can be and is often a reason for people to turn away from religion. But those of us who believe in the God of the Bible do have the confidence that for whatever reason, this is part of the arc of human history. And it was sort of, it's in there from the beginning. It's part of the claim that Christian and Jewish faith make, that things will get worse and then they will get better, and God allows you a certain amount of freedom, a room to drift away and make terrible mistakes, and then you have a chance to be pulled back in.
Studies have shown that more religious people are more likely to donate blood, give to charity. Where does morality, like a duty to help a stranger, care for the vulnerable, moderation, fidelity, where does that come from without religion?
Are you kidding? Can you not think of a single reason why it's good to give blood other than that God will punish you if you don't, or your preacher told you to?
But the humanists aren't giving blood.
They are. There's a statistical difference, but that is simply because people who are more engaged tend to be more engaged in lots of things. They go to church, they give blood, they vote. It doesn't mean that religion causes them to give blood. And even if it did, if you wanted people to give more blood, what you should do is have more blood drives, which is where most of the blood comes from. You could say you should all go to church because there'll be a statistically slightly greater chance of giving blood. It's a rather sideways way of accomplishing the goal of giving blood. But let me just zoom out to your general question. Why should you care for the needy? Why should you donate blood? Why should you refrain from murder and rape and robbery? You can't possibly say that the only reason to do it is because God will punish you in an afterlife. If God's back was turned, does that mean it would be okay to kill and rob and rape or let people drown or starve? I can think of plenty of secular reasons to do it. Namely, I would not want to be left to starve or drown or die of lack of blood. I would not want to be the victim of murder or rape or robbery. There's nothing special about me, and therefore what I demand of everyone else, I have to accept for myself. both for sheer consistency, for my identity as a moral person in negotiations with other people, and my concept of myself looking in a mirror, and because it's clear that we would all be better off in a world where everyone helped each other and refrained from hurting each other, compared to a society where everyone was a rapacious psychopath. That's why we should be moral. God has nothing to do with it.
Over to you.
I mean, I think generally every society is likely to work out some kind of moral code with some of the practical benefits that Dr. Pinker mentioned. People like to live under orderly conditions, yes, where they're not randomly killed on the streets. Yes, that's absolutely true. So what does religion add to that? Well, first, it adds a point of reference that is outside the norms of your particular society, right? A reason to stand outside decency and basic public order and make a stronger stance for truth and justice, even if it cuts against the practicalities and the orderly web of social relations that your society has worked out. And historically, we see this over and over again from a variety of historical figures. It's not specific to Christianity. You can go back to, Antigone in ancient Greece and go all the way forward to Martin Luther King in the segregated South. Again and again in human history, you have moments where people find a capacity to stand in judgment on what is wrong with the good, decent order of their society, the sins that it covers over and tolerates, because they believe that there is a standard of morality that exists separately from what we all get together in society and agree upon in order to get along with our lives. And what happens in Dr. Pinker's argument is that as an heir of Jewish and Christian civilization, he imports as this kind of commonsensical position metaphysical propositions about the existence of these human rights that no one has ever seen of or heard of. He cannot show me a human right under a microscope. He cannot prove to me in a mathematical theorem why, segregation was wrong, why it was wrong to murder people in the Gulag or the concentration camp for the sake of a better tomorrow. He asserts that it's necessary for, again, sort of decency and order and so on, and often it is, but there has to be a stronger reason when you find yourself in a position where what the society says is out of joint with what you think are the fundamental truths about the universe. And the last point, this applies especially to the powerful, right? Again, I'll sound like a left-winger. Speaking truth to power. Where does that line come from? Well, it comes from the fact that there are lots of people, powerful people, rich people, who listen to your spiel and say, well, that's all right for the ordinary person, but I'm rich and powerful. I would obviously benefit from exploitation. That has been a big part of the story of human history, and you need to have a better argument than, you should, follow the golden rule to convince let's say, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or a Donald Trump, the lions of the world, that they should take account of the lambs. And that is a big part of what religion, prophetic religion, has been able to do.
And Elon Musk, who calls himself a Christian, has been convinced by that?
Elon Musk is sadly somewhat far from Christianity as he prepares in the name of science and reason to, I believe to quote him, bootstrap human intelligence from its biological substrate into its technological future.
We're going to take a question from Carlos Agnana. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Growing up in Venezuela, Catholicism felt imposed on me, which made me skeptical of it. After immigrating to New York City some 4 or 5 years ago, where faith is not as dominant, I've come to appreciate its role in shaping who I am and shaping Latin American culture. Why is it that religion can be so stifling in a religious environment, whereas in a mostly secular one, it can feel so reassuring, even liberating? Muchísimas gracias.
If you're setting your values, if you're setting your priorities, if you're identifying what makes life meaningful by reason, by commitment to human well-being, then you can identify what it is in religion that is valuable and retain that and slough off the stuff that is actually harmful. So you apply the criteria of human flourishing and human reason to religion. You can unbundle the various good and bad things that are put together in the package and select the ones that actually can be defended and slough off the punishment of gay people, the denial of rights to women, the archaic factual beliefs. That is
Sorry.
like such as that the world was 5,000 years old, such as the world was created in 7 days. One can decide that the ritual, the music, the community are worth keeping, whereas the archaic and repressive parts can be sloughed off.
I think Christianity is completely compatible with a understanding of creation that does not require 7 literal days. So that would be an example of a archaic claim or an interpretation of Genesis that Christianity can survive without. Christianity is not, I think, cannot survive without the archaic claim that Jesus of Nazareth physically rose from the dead, right? There are certain things that religion claims about reality, that any religion claims, that are fundamental, and certain things that are secondary. And a religion where secondary issues are challenged or complicated by scientific findings or public argument can survive. But if Dr. Pinker and I could take a time machine back to first century Judea and observe that the empty tomb was not empty and that there was some purely naturalistic explanation for what happened at Easter, then my Christian faith would not survive that. Absolutely. And it is, I think this is where this complicates slightly my suggestion that, you should respect the truths that are available in all of the world's major religions. You should, but you should also be looking for a religion whose most important claims you think are fundamentally true. That is something that is worth looking for. You shouldn't be a pure relativist and say, well, I like the music and that's the reason to stay. It does in fact matter whether Muhammad was the seal of the prophets, whether Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah, and so on through similar propositional claims.
If AI, we created the artificial superintelligence, it moves on technologically from where it is now to what it could be.
Yes.
Beyond, and accelerates beyond human control, right? The singularity. Would that prove or disprove the existence of God for you?
For me, I think that the development of artificial intelligence generally is in keeping with the argument that I've unsuccessfully tried to press on Dr. Pinker about how the remarkable capacities of the human intellect to understand and shape the world are indicators that we are actually made in the image of its designer. So the fact that you have this incredible takeoff in AI based on a few sort of small basic premises of research that gets you to the point where you can have, incredible coding agents and whatever else is, I think, totally consonant with, and in fact confirms my broad world picture. I don't think there's any version of AI that would disprove the existence of God. I think there are forms of AI that would convince people that either that the AI was conscious or that we ourselves were not. I think that would be a false and dangerous idea, but I think it could be a very potent one.
If we had AI that moved beyond human control and the AI became religious, would that make you question your own lack of faith?
Well, given that current AI is trained on human output, and human output contains a lot of religious stuff, it wouldn't prove much. It would prove that it was emulating what it was trained on. I think what the existence of artificial intelligence does show is that you don't need an immaterial soul or any kind of mystical non-material substance to achieve human intelligence. And quite the contrary, I'm not sure if I understand Ross's argument that our ability to create artificial intelligence is another proof of the existence of God. Namely, he made us smart enough so that we could develop artificial intelligence.
It's all proof of the existence of God. That's the key.
Okay.
Properly understood.
It seems to me that the idea that human intelligence is proof of the existence of God is quite gratuitous. Particularly, and if anything, the ability to create artificial intelligence out of silicon shows that intelligence does not depend on some immaterial substance. It depends on information processing. It depends on algorithms. This has been the dominant theory within cognitive science of what makes humans smart, namely that neural tissue is capable of processing information. And the existence of artificial intelligence shows that at least when it comes to rationality, the ability to solve problems. There's no need for any immaterial substance.
If AI is able to achieve consciousness, Mr. Douthat, what then?
Well, first of all, I'm curious if Dr. Pinker thinks that AI is already conscious, since if you think that the intelligence of existing AI agents is an indication that humans are not so impressive after all, or are AIs conscious right now?
Beats the heck out of me.
Okay. So should we should be agnostic and not kill them, right?
Well,
shouldn't turn it off just to be safe?
If there was, I would not attribute consciousness to the current generation of AIs. I'd feel no compunctions about pulling the plug. Who knows what would happen if we had a lieutenant commander data, something that was so convincingly human that it would engage our empathy and make it very difficult to deny consciousness to it. Personally, I don't think it would be conscious.
Why not?
But I couldn't. The thing about consciousness in the sense of pure sentience, first-person subjective experience, is that by definition, you can't tell if anyone else has it, including, of course, other humans. That is, it's impossible to tell if any other human is conscious.
Aren't you sawing off now the branch on which your entire philosophy rests? You've spent the whole evening telling us it's self-evident. We don't need Christianity. It's self-evident that we should care about the well-being and feelings and experiences of other human beings, and now you're telling me that you can't even tell if I have those feelings at all? Well, this is what I mean by the self-undermining nature of the materialist project, right? The worldview doesn't fit together. You have pieces that don't fit.
Forget materialist. What I'm advocating is not materialism, but naturalism. That is, nothing spooky, no ghosts, no spirits, no spooks. Information is not material,
right,
but it is a constituent of the universe, and it's responsible for our understanding of intelligence. I have a very strong conviction, I think we all share it, that every one of us is conscious. We're made of the same stuff. We know that consciousness depends on neural tissue. Other people have the same neural tissue that we do. Each of us knows that we are conscious. That suffices to attribute consciousness to other people. When it comes to entities that could replicate our intelligence but are made out of different stuff, then I think our convictions of whether they're conscious starts to fade. And so does our ethical responsibility. If we actually had a humanoid robot, then I think those ethical intuitions would be sorely tested.
I should say I do believe in spirits. I do believe in ghosts and other supernatural entities. And so I have no problem contemplating the possibility that artificial intelligence could become conscious. And I think it's useful, though, to see the process of building artificial intelligence in that sense, not as the construction of a consciousness, but as a kind of summoning. The idea that if you do enough information processing at high enough speeds, some kind of ghost like us, some kind of direct self-aware being can come live inside the silicon. As a Christian, I worry about what kind of being you end up summoning.
Sierra Walensky has a question. Sierra, please stand up. Thank you so much.
I respect many aspects of the argument for religion, but I think the conversation overlooks the reality for women. I grew up in Salt Lake City in the shadow of the LDS, the Mormon Church, in a repressive, misogynist culture. From that experience, I understand traditional religion as a force for patriarchy. How do we reconcile the need for women to be respected as equal within these traditions? Thank you.
I think the broad point that I would make is that patriarchy historically is a constitutive feature of almost all human societies, almost irrespective of their religious beliefs or perspectives. And the strongest line and thread challenging patriarchy or changing it and altering it in various ways exists in the context of the Christian West. And despite Dr. Pinker will dispute this, but I think you can follow the thread back all the way to the New Testament, the role of women in the New Testament, how Jesus relates to men and women, and then through the rather distinctive place of female independence in medieval and pre-modern civilization, even before you get to modern feminism.
Is patriarchy a religious reality or a sociological reality?
Well, it's both. And to overcome it, one has to set aside various religious dogmas and simply reason your way to what does confer human rights, such as consciousness, such as agency. And in doing that, one comes to the conclusion that there is simply no defensible grounds for discriminating against or exploiting women. One has to slough off the religious dogma that got in the way of that, or the cultural dogma. It's only not just religious.
Let's move to my final round here. What is something that each of you would concede tonight? A point that the other made that you found compelling, that made you question perhaps some of your own positions on this? I'll start with you.
I will concede again that first, Dr. Pinker is correct to identify, many historic and contemporary crimes perpetrated in the name of religion. I still think it is an error to sort of assert that the category described as religion can be reduced to crimes committed in its name. I think that would require you to denounce all of politics for the same reason, but I'm conceding, not arguing. I'm conceding that there are characteristic vices of religion and modern liberalism is, from a Christian perspective, a kind of heresy of Christianity, I think, or a stepchild or something else. And I would say, from a Christian perspective, that this particular heresy has enabled Christianity, especially in the American context, to be shed or limit some of the temptations towards intolerance that have plagued religion throughout history. And in that sense, I think Dr. Pinker is correct that there have been certain significant gains to human welfare that have come about in the context of a weakening hold on religion.
What's the best point that Mr. Douthat made tonight?
Oh, that a case for religion can be made not on the basis of faith, but on the basis of reason. That is, that it's not a question of dogma or inerrancy of religious authorities, but that one can muster a rational and empirically based argument for religion.
Muster.
Thank you, Dr. Pinker and Mr. Douthat, for an excellent debate, and to Bank of America for your partnership. And thanks to everyone who joined us this evening, and to those of you watching at home. We have many more conversations on things that matter to come. Let's give a round of applause to our debaters.